The message did not arrive through Harry, a publicist, or an official palace office. It reached Meghan through a private channel connected directly to Charles. The invitation requested discretion, offered no explanation, and included one condition that immediately made the meeting more dangerous: she was expected to come alone. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors. For years, every exchange between the Sussexes and the palace had passed through layers of protection. Lawyers softened the language. Advisors controlled the timing. Public statements were examined until every sentence sounded calm, distant, and almost empty. Direct contact had become rare because direct contact carried risk. One careless word could reopen an old wound, trigger another headline, or expose what both sides had worked hard to hide. That was why Meghan immediately understood the weight of the invitation. Charles had not asked to speak with Harry. He had not proposed a family call or an official discussion. He wanted Meghan, privately, without witnesses and without the people who normally stood between them. She did not tell Harry at once. For several hours, Meghan considered the request alone. Part of her wanted to reject it. She had spent years speaking about a system that made her feel watched, restricted, and unprotected. Now that same institution was offering her the private access she had once been denied. But access inside the monarchy was never free. It was usually given because someone wanted something in return. When she finally told Harry, the atmosphere changed. His first question was not why Charles wanted the meeting. It was why Meghan had waited before telling him. The delay was small, but it created the first fracture. Harry feared the palace had chosen Meghan because officials believed they could separate her from him, test her loyalties, or discover what she might reveal when he was not present. The invitation offered no real answers. It referred only to unfinished family matters and future responsibilities. The words sounded careful, almost harmless, yet they carried the pressure of titles, children, inheritance, and decisions that could shape the family for years. Meghan also suspected Charles was not acting alone. Senior figures may have approved the contact while keeping their names away from it, ready to deny involvement if the meeting became public. The secrecy was not only about avoiding the press. Someone wanted Harry outside the room before he understood what was truly being negotiated. Meghan accepted. She knew that entering alone could alter her marriage, her public identity, and her connection to the crown forever. But before Meghan could discover why Charles wanted her there, the palace began removing witnesses, changing schedules, and creating a silence that looked far too carefully planned to be accidental. Hours before Meghan arrived, staff members were reassigned, appointments disappeared, and one trusted royal advisor was ordered to leave the building early. Nothing about the preparations resembled an ordinary family conversation. The palace was not simply arranging privacy, it was constructing a meeting that could later be denied. The location had been chosen with care. It was far from the grand rooms normally associated with royal audiences, away from the routes used by visitors, staff, and photographers. Meghan was not brought through the entrance reserved for official guests. She entered through a private access point, one designed to attract no attention and leave almost no trace. Charles's public schedule showed nothing. No meeting, no family discussion, no unexplained gap that could raise questions later. If the story leaked, the palace could say there had been no formal engagement, because officially there had not been one. Even the people who normally protected the king during sensitive conversations were missing. Aides who took notes, tracked promises, and recorded decisions had been removed. One senior courtier reportedly objected, warning that without witnesses, Meghan and Charles could leave with completely different versions of what had been said. Charles dismissed the concern. He insisted the conversation was personal. But inside the monarchy, personal could mean titles, children, security, money, loyalty, and the future of the crown. Meghan understood that. She noticed everything: the hidden entrance, the empty passageways, the absence of familiar officials. None of it felt accidental. She had learned long ago that the palace rarely moved without purpose, and silence itself could be a form of control. She carried no visible papers, but she had prepared questions in private. What future did the palace imagine for Archie and Lilibet? What did Charles expect from Harry? Why had protection been discussed publicly but withheld privately? And why was Meghan being asked to answer questions that should have been put directly to her husband? Outside the process, Harry received only brief updates. Every delay deepened his suspicion. He became increasingly convinced that Charles was not simply asking for privacy. He was testing whether Meghan could be separated from Harry long enough to negotiate without his anger, his memory, or his refusal standing in the way. Then Meghan entered the room. Charles was waiting beside a sealed folder. It carried no royal crest, no official label, and no clue about what was hidden inside. The folder remained closed during the first polite exchanges, but Charles's opening words made it clear that this was not a reunion, an apology, or a father trying to repair a broken family. Meghan expected Charles to mention the interviews, the accusations, or the years of bitterness that had divided the family. Instead, he asked a colder question: what did she believe her family's relationship with the crown should look like after him? In that moment, the conversation became something far larger. There was no apology, no demand for Meghan to withdraw her claims. Charles did not defend the palace or challenge her version of the past. He moved straight beyond the wounds that had brought them there, speaking instead about what would happen when those wounds became someone else's responsibility. The conflict, he warned, could outlive him. One day, William might inherit not only the crown, but also the unfinished struggle with Harry and Meghan. By then, old anger could become fixed policy. Private resentment could harden into permanent distance, leaving Archie and Lilibet to inherit a division they had never created. That appeared to be Charles's real fear. He seemed less troubled by another damaging headline than by what Meghan's children might eventually claim, reject, or reveal about the monarchy. Distance had not erased their royal connection. It had made that connection unpredictable. The children remained tied to the family by blood, history, titles, and memory, yet they were being raised beyond the palace's control. Charles asked Meghan how she intended them to understand themselves. Would they grow up as private American citizens? As grandchildren of a king? As members of a royal family that rarely saw them? Or would they be forced to live somewhere between those identities, belonging to both worlds but fully accepted by neither? Meghan's answer carried years of frustration. The palace, she said, had benefited from that uncertainty. It acknowledged the children's royal identity when their names served the monarchy's public image, yet treated them as outsiders when questions of protection, recognition, and responsibility arose. Their connection to the crown was celebrated when useful and minimized when it became inconvenient. Then, Meghan asked the question Charles had been avoiding. Why was he discussing Harry's children with her instead of speaking honestly to his son? Charles's response was restrained, but brutal. Harry, he said, could no longer separate royal decisions from loyalty, personal injury, and the memory of Diana. Every discussion became a judgment on the past. Every condition became another betrayal. The implication was unmistakable. Charles believed Meghan now held greater influence over what Archie and Lilibet would eventually be told. He placed his hand on the sealed folder. The monarchy, he said, needed clarity before another public crisis made private choices impossible. Meghan had entered expecting difficult words, but the moment Charles opened the folder, she realized the palace had already imagined a future for her children, and had written parts of it without their parents' consent. Inside the folder was no apology and no financial settlement. It contained a proposal concerning access, royal recognition, family appearances, and the future visibility of Meghan's children. Yet one paragraph carried a condition so sensitive that even Harry had not been told it was under consideration. The first pages offered what looked like a path back, but only a narrow one. There would be private invitations to selected family gatherings, carefully managed ceremonial appearances, and a clearer place for Archie and Lilibet within the royal story. Their names could be acknowledged more openly. Their connection to the crown would no longer exist only in distant statements and formal records. But the offer stopped far short of restoring Harry and Meghan as working royals. The proposal described something more controlled: a public association without full return, family access without institutional power, recognition without freedom to define the terms. The children could attend certain events, appear at carefully chosen moments, and maintain a visible bond with the monarchy while their parents continued their independent life abroad. Even security was conditional. Assistance would be provided only for appearances approved by the palace. Travel, protection, and private arrangements would depend on whether the crown considered the occasion official enough to support. Meghan saw the danger immediately. The monarchy appeared willing to welcome the children while continuing to restrict the parents. It wanted the comfort of family unity without surrendering control over how that unity would be presented. Charles defended the condition with equal force. Trust, he argued, could not be rebuilt while every private conversation carried the risk of becoming a documentary, interview, or memoir. The palace would not open its doors if every word spoken inside them might later be used as evidence against it. Then, Meghan reached the paragraph that changed everything. Before any formal reconciliation, Harry would be expected to enter a period of direct communication with Charles. No Meghan, no lawyers, no media advisors, no intermediaries. For the first time, the purpose of the document became clear. This was not only about bringing a family together. It was about changing who stood beside Harry when royal decisions were made. Meghan asked whether she had been brought there to approve the condition, persuade Harry to accept it, or remain silent until Charles approached him. Charles did not answer directly. He simply said she understood Harry's emotional reactions better than anyone. That response told her enough. Beneath the proposal, another page carried references to inheritance, private records, and the children's future access to royal history. Meghan pushed the first document aside and demanded the truth. What, exactly, did Charles want from her? Charles finally answered, but his response transformed the meeting from a reconciliation attempt into a private negotiation over Harry's loyalty, Meghan's influence, and the future identity of their children. Charles had not summoned Meghan to offer peace. He wanted her to help prevent a final break with Harry, one he feared could become permanent after his reign. But the request came with a shocking implication. The king believed Meghan possessed the power either to save Harry's royal connection or destroy it completely. He believed pressure from the palace would fail. Any official demand, warning, or condition would only confirm Harry's deepest suspicion that the institution still wanted obedience without understanding his pain. Charles feared that if he approached his son directly, Harry would hear control instead of concern and turn another private disagreement into a final refusal. Meghan, however, could reach him differently. Charles did not say she controlled Harry. He did not need to. By asking her to persuade him, he was admitting that she had become the strongest influence over Harry's emotional decisions, public choices, and relationship with the monarchy. It could have sounded like respect. To Meghan, it sounded dangerously close to blame. For years, the palace had allowed her to be portrayed as the force pulling Harry away. Now, behind closed doors, the king was asking that same woman to bring him back. Meghan's anger sharpened. she asked why she should repair damage the monarchy had repeatedly placed at her feet. Charles answered that he was not asking for a full return. He wanted Harry to accept confidential talks about family access, future invitations, public statements, and the place Archie and Lilibet might still hold within the crown. Then came the deeper warning. Time was running out. Charles feared that after his death, William would not continue the discussion. The next reign was already being shaped around William and Catherine, and there might be no space left for unfinished negotiations, emotional exceptions, or repeated attempts at reconciliation. Some inside the palace wanted the Sussex question settled before power changed hands, terrified that an unresolved family war could erupt during the transition. Meghan challenged the word immediately. Settled how? Through reconciliation? Silence? Or surrender? For the first time, Charles's answer carried more pain than authority. The monarchy needed stability, he said, but he also wanted a connection with Harry's children before they became old enough to reject the institution completely. Official decisions had created private losses, and he knew a grandfather could not recover years after they were gone. Meghan refused to make promises. She would not persuade Harry unless the palace acknowledged what had been done to their family and stopped treating her as the price of peace. Charles listened, then delivered the limit she had feared. Acknowledgement might be possible in private, but never in the public form Meghan wanted. The purpose of the meeting was finally clear, yet the unanswered question became even more dangerous. What had Charles promised Meghan in return for helping bring Harry back to the royal table? Meghan did not reject Charles's request. Instead, she presented conditions of her own conditions involving her children, her reputation, and the palace figures she believed had worked against her. What began as Charles's proposal suddenly became Meghan's opportunity to demand what she had never received inside the monarchy. She made one point clear from the beginning. She would not act as a messenger. She would not carry Charles's wishes home, soften them for Harry, and then return with an answer as though she were negotiating on behalf of a man who had been deliberately kept outside the room. If Charles wanted her cooperation, the arrangement had to protect her family first. Meghan demanded direct assurances concerning Archie and Lilibet's security during any future visit connected to the crown. She wanted written rules, not vague promises, covering their titles, ceremonial roles, official photographs, and access to family occasions. No last-minute changes, no private conditions hidden behind public smiles. No confusion that could later be blamed on her. Then, she turned to the issue that had followed her for years. Anonymous briefings had repeatedly presented Meghan as the permanent cause of the royal divide. She insisted that the palace stop allowing unnamed voices to shape the story, while official statements pretended there was nothing to answer. She also demanded that one senior courtier connected to earlier conflicts be removed from future discussions involving the Sussexes. To Meghan, trust could not be rebuilt, while the same people who had deepened the damage remained close to the process. Her next request was quieter, but more painful. She wanted acknowledgement that she had entered royal life without the protection, preparation, or support she had been led to expect. It did not have to be a public apology, but it had to exist in language that could not later be denied. Charles resisted. Written concessions could leak. They could be quoted without context or treated as proof that the monarchy had admitted wrongdoing. Meghan answered that verbal sympathy had failed before. Trust could not be rebuilt on private kindness followed by public silence. Then she asked for something the palace had not expected: access for Archie and Lilibet to family letters, photographs, and personal records connecting them to Diana and the late Queen. Those archives held more than memories. They could shape how the children one day understood Harry's past and the family's treatment of their parents. Charles agreed to consider limited access, but refused to promise documents controlled by others. William's household had not been told. Several demands would be seen as royal privilege without royal duty. Charles finally asked whether Harry would accept the arrangement if every condition were met. Meghan gave him no promise. Meghan left the room with no signed agreement. But the greatest shock came afterward, when Harry learned that Charles had discussed his future as though he were the one person who could not be trusted to negotiate it himself. Harry had feared the palace would pressure Meghan. He had not expected Meghan and Charles to discuss a plan for his future without him. When he discovered the full purpose of the meeting, his anger was aimed in two directions, and for the first time, Meghan could not easily tell which betrayal hurt him more. At first, relief came before suspicion. Meghan had returned safely, without an argument becoming public, and without the palace turning the meeting into a spectacle. But as she explained the folder, the conditions, and Charles's request, Harry's expression changed. The danger had not been what happened to Meghan inside that room. It was what had been decided about him while he remained outside it. Charles had treated his son as too emotional, too wounded, or too unpredictable to approach directly. To Harry, that judgment cut deeper than the proposal itself. It confirmed an old fear. The palace still discussed his life behind closed doors, shaped the terms in private, and then presented the outcome as a choice he was expected to accept. He asked Meghan why she had stayed after realizing Charles wanted her influence. Why had she listened while his father described him as a problem to be managed? Meghan did not retreat. Walking away, she argued, would have sacrificed the first real chance to secure protection, access, and clear guarantees for Archie and Lilibet. Harry saw loyalty as refusing the process. Meghan saw power in remaining long enough to understand it. That difference widened when she repeated Charles's warning about William. Harry heard emotional pressure. The message seemed designed to frighten him into agreement before the next rain closed every door. Meghan heard something colder and more practical. William's power was approaching, and promises not secured now might disappear later. Diana's shadow returned to the conversation. Harry remembered how private royal discussions could produce decisions that were later described as unavoidable. He refused to let history repeat itself. The proposal, he said, should be rejected unless Charles spoke to him directly and admitted why Meghan had been approached first. Meghan warned that an immediate confrontation could destroy the small opening they had gained. For the first time, their goals no longer looked identical. Harry wanted recognition that he had been wronged. Meghan wanted protection strong enough to survive another betrayal. Harry decided he would contact Charles himself. But before he could make the call, news of Meghan's private visit reached another royal household. The meeting had been designed to avoid family interference, yet once William learned Meghan had been given private access to Charles, the quiet negotiation became a struggle over who had the right to shape the monarchy's next chapter. William was not angered simply because Meghan had met Charles. He was angered because the discussion concerned decisions that could survive into his reign. To him, Charles had offered access, recognition, and future influence without consulting the people who would eventually be forced to honor those promises. He did not hear about the meeting from his father. The news reached him through palace channels, carried in careful fragments by advisors who were already being asked to explore possible arrangements for the Sussex family. That alone deepened his frustration. Plans involving titles, ceremonies, private archives, security, and public appearances were being discussed without the formal involvement of his household. William believed every promise made now could become an obligation later. Charles could offer reconciliation as a father, but the next king might be expected to maintain it as policy. What troubled him most was the imbalance. Meghan could gain controlled access to royal life while remaining outside its duties and free to criticize the institution publicly. In William's eyes, that was not reconciliation. It was influence without accountability. Harry's absence from the room made the situation even more disturbing. William saw it as proof that the negotiation had been built around Meghan's power over his brother. Charles had not spoken directly to his son. He had gone through the person the palace had spent years describing as the source of the separation. William began questioning which version of Charles had made the offer. Was he acting as king, protecting the crown? As a father, desperate to recover Harry? Or as a guilty grandfather trying to reclaim time with children he barely knew? The three roles had become dangerously tangled. Catherine's concern was quieter, but no less serious. Archie and Lilibet, she feared, could grow up trapped between two histories, one told by their parents and another protected by the palace. Access to letters and family records might offer connection, but it could also deepen the conflict over what they were meant to believe. William opposed any written guarantee that might restrict his authority in a future reign. Around him, advisors divided. Some believed Charles had to repair the family while he still had the power. Others warned that every concession would create another crisis later. The leak itself now looked suspicious. Someone may have wanted William to intervene before Charles went too far. Charles refused to abandon the talks, though he accepted that any lasting agreement would need wider approval. Meghan, expecting resistance, had remembered enough to defend herself if the palace denied the meeting. William then requested a private conversation with Charles. The dispute was no longer only about Harry and Meghan. It had become a confrontation between the present king and the man waiting to inherit everything. While father and son argued over the monarchy's future, Meghan faced a final choice: protect the secrecy Charles had requested or reveal enough of the meeting to stop the palace from rewriting it. No agreement was announced, no photograph was released, and no palace statement confirmed Meghan had entered the building. Yet the silence only made the meeting more explosive. If Charles had truly asked Meghan to bring Harry back, what did he fear would happen if she refused, or if William ultimately overruled him? The meeting had exposed every hidden struggle beneath the royal feud. Charles was fighting against time. Harry was fighting an institution he believed had never fully heard him. Meghan was resisting a palace that wanted her influence but feared her independence. William was preparing to inherit promises he had never approved. One question had been answered. Charles wanted Meghan's help in preventing a permanent break with Harry. But that answer created something more dangerous. Did he truly want reconciliation? Or did he only want the conflict contained before the next reign began? Meghan's conditions could be seen as protection for her children. They could also be portrayed as an attempt to secure royal access without returning to royal duty. That uncertainty gave the palace another weapon. Whatever she requested could be framed as either reasonable caution or personal ambition. Harry faced an equally painful choice. Could he accept an arrangement that might protect Archie and Lilibet when the first discussions had taken place without him? And even if Charles honored every promise, what would stop William from rejecting them later? That possibility threatened to create another betrayal, one even deeper, because the children would inherit it. The palace's greatest fear may no longer have been another interview, memoir, or documentary. It may have been what Archie and Lilibet would eventually say about growing up outside a family that still used their titles and remembered their names. Royal inheritance was never only about jewels, property, or rank. It was also made of letters, photographs, private memories, old wounds, and competing versions of the truth. By approaching Meghan alone, Charles had admitted something the monarchy rarely acknowledged. She could no longer be removed from Harry's royal story. And the sealed proposal had not been destroyed. It was returned to a restricted file, waiting for illness, ceremony, succession, or public pressure to force the same unfinished negotiation back into the open. Meghan left without a crown, a role, or a public promise. But she carried something more powerful: the knowledge that the king believed Harry's connection to the monarchy could not be repaired without her. Was she being invited back into the royal story, or quietly being made responsible if Harry never returned? Because behind palace doors, reconciliation is rarely offered without conditions, and the next private meeting may not be about bringing a family together, but deciding who will be blamed when the final door closes.